College football season is here, and Underdog Fantasy has the perfect deal to get you in the game. Use the code WALKON to grab up to $1,000 in bonus cash and a free pick on all the college football action. Whether you're riding with your alma mater or making bold predictions, this is your chance to win big all season long. Don't miss out. Use code WALKON, that's WALKON, to get started today.
And now it's First and Goal with your host, Big Bear and the Curtain Guy.
Welcome back, everybody, to First and Goal, the only podcast that breaks down Big Ten football with more enthusiasm than Iowa fans spotting a punt. We are your hosts. I'm Big Bear T. Tyler Bansky.
I'm the Curtain Guy, Cole Schutte.
Everybody, it's week 3, and we've got a lot to cover. We're going to dive headfirst into all the action from week 2. Upsets were brewing, defenses were bending, sometimes breaking, and offenses were either lighting up the scoreboard or still searching for that wonderful map to the end zone. We're going to be breaking down who showed up, who got shown up, and who's still wondering if it's too late to hit the transfer portal. Don't worry, we've got you covered with a week 3 preview. It's locked and loaded like a 4th and inches quarterback sneak. No timeouts left, no room for mistakes. All joking aside, buckle up, grab your game day snack, and get ready because we're going to kick things off. Week 2, Badger's unable to join us this week, so I kind of want to briefly touch on this. We were trying to bait him into taking Bowling Green last week in that game against Penn State. He didn't, probably hitting himself a little bit because that was a great showing by the MAC faithful. We've said it before, Bowling Green is predicted to be the best offense in the Mid-American Conference. It showed up, Cole. I mean, the first half, they were, 24-20. They had the lead over Penn State going into the half. They really moved the ball well. When you look at the team stats, they had almost 400 yards of offense, which, if you're Penn State, that's a little bit worrisome when you're dealing with non-conference games. But the way that they moved the ball, even on the ground, almost averaged 5 yards a carry against the Nittany Lions. And for the most part, they controlled the time of possession. So I'm, hats off to Bowling Green for a great showing. I think that a lot of MAC teams, as we kind of get into the episode, have shown up thus far this year. And it's making that group of 5 look pretty strong. Do you have any thoughts on that game against Penn State?
No, I gave Jeff some props because he took Bowling Green when it was a 4-touchdown, underdog, and obviously ended up getting that and winning some money off of that. So props to him for picking that. But I don't know what to think about Penn State currently, right? They look pretty good against West Virginia, and then all of a sudden you're going against a MAC team. And granted, like you said, it's probably the best offense in the MAC, and certainly looks like it'll be one of the better offenses in the country. But they were struggling, and it looked pretty dire up until that last touchdown that kind of pushed it out of reach there at the towards the end of the game. So Penn State's got some things to still figure out, but BG looks primed to get back to the top of the MAC like they were when you were attending.
Yeah, 3 out of the 4 teams in our Big Ten preseason hopefuls for the college football playoff have kind of started slow offensively, I guess you'd say, over the 2 weeks. You have Oregon, Penn State, and even Michigan. Speaking of the Wolverines, we're going to shift to the big game up in Ann Arbor last weekend. Michigan and Texas faced off. I guess you could say, the result we were looking for. I know when it came to my goal line stand pick, it kind of stood up there for me, but what'd you think of that matchup, Cole?
I think a lot of people across the country, and obviously including this podcast, as you mentioned, felt good about Texas' chances in this matchup, but I'm not sure anyone saw the level of domination coming from the Longhorns, right? We were more or less a holding call away from a 31-3 score at halftime, and I think that caught a lot of people off guard. We knew that there was going to be some struggles for Michigan's offense, but I think it might be time to start getting a little nervous if you cheer for the Maize and Blue up in Ann Arbor. They finished with 284 total yards, which isn't great. in this type of matchup. And that was really embellished by a 78-yard touchdown drive to finish the game, in which the result was no longer a question at that point. You pair that with 3 turnovers and a 3-for-12 day on third down. And what you ended up with was a defense that, while talented, found itself on the field constantly. And I think that was kind of what ultimately ended up breaking this wide open. I'm not going to take away from the Longhorns' effort. They clearly came into Ann Arbor ready to play, and they walked out having cemented themselves as one of the top 3 teams in the country, in my opinion. Quinn Ewers is definitely going to have his name in the Heisman conversation. I think we knew that before the season even started, but he was masterful. He went 24 of 36, which is 67% completion, 246 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and like I said, was a holding call away from possibly punching that 4th one in as well. So looking forward for these teams, Texas gets a very manageable slate until they get to the middle of October, where they have the Red River rivalry against Oklahoma, and then they get to follow that up with number 1 Georgia after that. So I think those 2 games are going to go a long way for defining what Texas is going to ultimately end up doing in the SEC. And for Michigan, they get a chance to rebound against Arkansas State this week before welcoming another potent offense in the Trojans, when they come to town. But that's obviously one that we'll break down once again. So it's not all lost. We talked about, there's room for error with this new playoff, but you have to be slightly uncomfortable if you're rooting for the Wolverines at this point.
And I'll say that Michigan offense has given us concern, but it's also the fact of their strength of running the ball has been non-existent in these first couple of weeks. Offensively, 204 of the 284 total offensive yards came passing the ball, and Donovan Edwards didn't even surpass 50 yards. I don't even think he's surpassed even 60 yards in the first game. So the question for me is your offensive line not getting push to where you're opening gaps for Donovan Edwards to produce? And in which case, kind of like we've talked about in the preseason, was you're going to have teams down the stretch that make Michigan beat them passing the ball. Now, we talked about that several years ago when we talked about a young J.J. McCarthy and Cade McNamara in his time at Michigan. Davis Warren, again, another fairly inexperienced quarterback. Is he going to be able to step up and win those games down the line? And without a running game, I don't think so. So that's my concern with Michigan. And I think that they need to get that one fixed pretty quickly with USC coming along the way here soon.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the reality of the situation for Michigan, right? Is you were offensive line dominant, right? They won the Joe Moore Award 2 years in a row and were consistently one of the best units in the entire country. The problem is all 5 of those guys are now gone, and with them, all the experience that they had, right? So you can put talent in there. They're not bad offensive line talent, but they don't have nearly the experience in, doing what Michigan wants to do. And so because of that, you're seeing the struggling with the running game, which is what Michigan is designed to do. I'm not trying to sit here and just take shots at them, but that's been Michigan's identity, and especially so in the last 3 years. So when they can't use that run to the way that they have been designed to, they're going to struggle because it just isn't how they're designed to win football games. So, none of their running backs, I believe, have a rushing touchdown on the year. And that is frightening for a team that led the country in rushing touchdowns the last 3 years again. And so they've got to find some type of continuity or chemistry in the run game, because they can't become a passing oriented team and think that that's going to work out well for them down the stretch.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that one pans out. The other game we wanted to talk about from week 2 was Colorado at Nebraska. Nebraska more or less dominated this game. Let's just kind of put it that way. in many facets of this game, the Nebraska offense controlled. They had 35 minutes to 24 minutes time of possession. So they took the ball out of Shedeur Sanders' hands, just like we were expecting them to. Colorado was quite undisciplined in this game. 9 penalties for 104 yards. Granted, Nebraska had 105, but that was on 12 penalties. So more penalties, less severe. But for Colorado, fewer penalties, more severe. When you look at the stat lines, Dylan Raiola, 185 yards, 1 touchdown, but the big one, Dante Dowdell, a guy that I had as my sleeper pick in preseason, he had 17 carries, 74 yards, 2 touchdowns. I think that Nebraska is starting to find who their running back number 1 is in that rotation, and that is going to be a guy who will be there this year, more than likely next year, and has a very bright future. And then from the other side, Colorado, Shedeur Sanders does what he does, man. He puts up 244 yards passing, 1 touchdown, did have an interception that went back for 6 points for Nebraska. But the other thing I wanted to talk about with Nebraska was that they held Colorado scoreless all the way up until halftime, even mostly into the third quarter before, it's 3 points for Colorado going into the fourth quarter. There's no doubt in my mind that this game was in hand. But the thing that I will critique on Nebraska is that they didn't necessarily finish. They went into half with a 28-0 lead, came out and just essentially coasted. Now, that's great and all when you're up 28-0, but when you get into games against better opponents where you really need to have a complete game, all facets, you really need to finish. You need to at least put up points in that second half and show that, you're a force to be reckoned with. So that's my knock on Nebraska, is that I feel like they should have done more in that second half of the game. They probably could have hung like 42 or more points on Colorado if they wanted to. But yeah, that's overall a thrashing in Omaha. What'd you think of that one, Cole?
I think it was on par for what we expected. It was what happened last year with a much less talented Nebraska team. This is just kind of the norm, right? I continue to just be baffled by the hype that we give Colorado, because they're not strong where it matters. If you want to win in big time college football, you have to have line talent on both sides, and they don't have it, and they're not developing it either. When they do get some sort of talent in there, he went to the transfer portal, he got Jordan Seaton, and it's not impressive. And then on top of it, I'm not impressed with the culture. When you have your starting quarterback taking pot shots at his offensive line and blaming them for the reason, why they didn't win the game, that immediately shows me that nobody's head is in the right, space, and that this is all just some glorified draft tryout. And the problem with that is these kids are going to be interviewed by NFL GMs, and they're going to be asked about those. And if they don't have a legitimate answer to them, they're not getting picked up. So there's a lot of things wrong with Colorado from a technical standpoint, but I think the majority of it comes from the culture aspect and what they're actually about as a program. And I think that is going to continue to haunt them until they right that.
And the question again for Deion Sanders is, I know he's coaching there this year. Shedeur is going to graduate. I can't recall if Shiloh graduates as well this year or is draft eligible, but the unknown is Deion in this for the long haul, or is this kind of a short-term thing and another opportunity will pull him away elsewhere? I guess we'll have to see. That nothing's written off here on Colorado. We are 2 games in. They do have another tough matchup this weekend against Colorado State, a game that we all know from last year was quite brutal, especially if you're Travis Hunter and our Twitter feed, because that went wild for us last year. But verdict's still out. We'll have to see what happens with Colorado. Before we get into week 3 preview, we're going to kind of talk about the goal line stand scoring and standings. And before we get to that point, remember, guys, if you're not following, make sure you follow, like, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Twitter. We're on everywhere. If you haven't done so, make sure, again, we challenged you last week and we love the response we got from you guys. Share it to a friend, a family member, somebody who you know loves Big Ten football as much as you do, as much as we do, and let's grow the Goal Line Guardians even more. Just a recap, if you're brand new to the show, this is the big board. This is where we list our goal line stand picks and our Big Ten picks for the week. We have a point rating system. Each game you pick correctly is 1 point. Each week we pick one upset pick at least. That upset pick is worth 2 points if it comes true. There's a prop bet. We're picking a player, a stat line. They have to hit it in order to get 3 points or come within 25% of that pick to get 2 points. And lastly, the goal line stand is a just bold pick for Big Ten football. For example, if we said Ohio State scores 55 plus, you looked at week 2, that's not that bold, but if you hit it, 4 points. So those are the scoring rules. If you want to follow along at home, we love it. We love your effort and attention to the show. Standings after week 2, Kurt and Guy, you're bringing up the rear, but not really, because it's a 3-point margin. Let's not say this is a blown open score by any stretch of the imagination, but Badger, myself, the model, we have 35 points. Some of those bonus points come in handy when you need them. The model's still hanging in there, which we'll have to see how that plays out down the road. Let's move to our first game of week 3 that we are going to preview. That is the Alabama Crimson Tide coming to town to play the Wisconsin Badgers. This is by far the biggest matchup of Luke Fickell's tenure at Wisconsin. Let's just say that, especially the fact that he gets the Tide at home. These two teams have only met 2 other times, in 2015's opening weekend down in Arlington, Texas, and before that was 1928. So this is the 3rd overall meeting. It's going to be, interesting to see. I wish this was an Alabama team coming up in the middle of November, but unfortunately we're not that lucky. They come up in mid-September. Key storylines and breakdowns for this game. Both teams are coming into this matchup 2-0, but the path of how they got here is polar opposites. For the Badgers, they hold 2 less than stellar offensive performances and 14-point wins over both Western Michigan and South Dakota. For Alabama, the Tide rolled right over their opponents in Western Kentucky and South Florida, combining for 105 total points, 15 touchdowns, just under 1,000 total yards of total offense, and holding their opponents to just 8 points a game. Key things that we should point out here, Wisconsin's offensive struggles and also Alabama's high-powered offense. So let's face it, Wisconsin hasn't exactly been roaring out of the gate this season. They barely scraped by Western Michigan, a team that got crushed by Ohio State the week following. And then they struggled again against an FCS opponent, South Dakota. So we look at this, and what's the issue? The Badgers' downfield passing game has borderline been non-existent. Miami transfer quarterback Tyler Van Dyke can't connect on big plays. The running game hasn't been strong enough to pick up the slack either. And then unlike your traditional Badger teams, they're not dominating time of possession. And overall, they just don't have that usual physical edge that Wisconsin teams tend to have on the front lines. Now they're going to face an Alabama team and an Alabama defense that's been locking down the secondary, even against like a potent Western Kentucky air raid attack. Wisconsin's offense doesn't necessarily have that firepower that they would need to be in a matchup like this. That's my opinion. What do you think about this matchup, looking at it from a bird's eye view, Cole?
I haven't been impressed with Wisconsin for the first 2 weeks. I mean, I know we get caught up in comparing teams, especially this early in the season, and it's not the greatest thing to lean on. But when you look at the elite level programs that have played similar type of competition or even similar teams, it just kind of puts things in perspective, at least for me. Like you mentioned, this was a Wisconsin team that found itself in a fist fight with Western Michigan in the first week and very much was in trouble of losing. And then you watch that same Western Michigan team travel to Columbus and get absolutely throttled. And so I'm not expecting Wisconsin to be in that upper echelon with Ohio State and Georgia and Texas and Alabama, but it's Wisconsin, right? You're still expecting that top 7 to 15 type of range program that should be able to handle those lower level opponents and compete when it comes to a game like this. And unfortunately, I haven't seen it. And so now the question is, has Wisconsin been fucking with all of us and they're just not, opening up the playbook as much as they would like until this game? Or is this a failed attempt at the air raid again? And Wisconsin has now gotten themselves in a position where they've gotten away from what they do well, which is running the ball. And now they can't do what they were aiming to do, which is pass the ball. And so they're stuck in this no man's land. And I think if that's the case, I think Wisconsin is in big trouble on Saturday, because while Alabama has had moments where they struggled, especially last week with the 3 turnovers, and that was a dogfight too into the fourth quarter before they piled it on. But this is still a team that's way more loaded in terms of talent, and it is way more prepared for a game of this magnitude than what Wisconsin is. So I want to believe that Wisconsin has a little bit to show us still, but looking at all of the metrics and the eye test, I think the Badgers are in trouble for this type of matchup coming this weekend.
And it all starts for Alabama on that offensive side of the ball. Jalen Milroe is an X factor for sure. He's dual threat. He has the ability to do both things. He's been solid. He's thrown no interceptions so far this season. He's shown flashes of that running game. He has 4 rushing touchdowns so far through 2 games. Camp Randall will be and always has been like an electric atmosphere, but Alabama, I feel, can strike early. And then when they take that crowd out of it, like Wisconsin's not going to have that offensive firepower to juice them back up. So I feel like you suck the air out of that stadium, and Alabama's kind of got Wisconsin right where they want them. And then the other part that people know about but haven't talked about enough is wide receiver Ryan Williams. He's been an absolute stud for the Crimson Tide on offense. He's accumulated over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in his first 2 college starts. That's a vertical threat that's going to test that secondary a whole lot. And then if they pull over help to kind of cover him, then you free up like Jeremy Bernard to get involved in that action. It's kind of like a never-ending cycle. And you, just like you talked about, Cole, there's so much firepower and so many weapons and talent on that offense for Alabama that Wisconsin's not going to be able to squeak away with a 7 to 14 point win, only scoring 20 to 28 points. Like Alabama's going to get their own. You have to be able to put up points and at a decent margin in order to just stay in this one. So we're going to bring up the big board again and kind of get to our pick here. I think we know where we're heading, but who do you take in this matchup then?
Yeah, like you said, Wisconsin can't afford, nor are they built to get into a shootout with Alabama. And I think Alabama comes in. I think they get some quick early scores. I think they take the student section out of it. And I think that kind of leads the way. And ultimately, the Crimson Tide kind of roll to, I have them at a 21-point victory, 38-17, which we'll talk about later. But that's kind of my goal line stand bold pick is them clearing that 17.5 margin. I just think they're just too much for the Badgers, who don't really have an identity at the current moment.
Yeah, I think that even if Alabama kind of struggles early, like we saw in that USF game, they came on late and they came on firing. And I think that if you're Wisconsin and you hit that fourth quarter and you're kind of worn down and beaten, that's where Alabama's going to pour it on. I think that's where that spread comes in at. I have it close, but not quite the exact same. I think we're both the same here because we have Wisconsin with 17 points. And like we just said, you can't expect to only score like 20 points and beat Alabama. It's just not going to happen. I have it Alabama 34, Wisconsin 17. So they do, hit that spread, but by a lot slimmer, razor thin margin that I think you might have it. The model agrees with us. They also have the Alabama Crimson Tide. So it's a clean sweep here. I've seen crazy things happen, but I think we'd be kind of foolish to go against the Tide after what we've seen so far. Moving to game number 2 on our week 3 preview, we have Washington against Washington State. This is a game where the Huskies come in favored by less than 4.5. The overall record in the Apple Cup rivalry, the Huskies currently hold a 76-33 record against the Cougars, 6 ties overall in their meetings. The Huskies are also 12-3 versus Wazoo in their last 15 matchups. And last year, Washington pulled out that victory 24-21 against the Cougars. Key matchups here is going to be passing attack versus Wazoo's defense. But let's talk about Wazoo's offense at the start here. The Cougars offense has been on fire, some would say. Even though they lost Cam Ward to Miami, they've lit up the scoreboard against FCS opponent Portland State, and then they stunned Texas Tech with over 300 rushing yards, nearly 200 alone coming from quarterback John Mateer himself. They've only had 1 turnover through 2 games, and the Cougars are playing clean, disciplined football. They've averaged over 20 yards of reception, which ranks at the top of all of college football in terms of downfield attack. And then the Huskies, on the other hand, haven't faced a true test yet. They had Weber State in week 1 and then another MAC school, Eastern Michigan, last week. So this will be their first major matchup of the season. Standout performances, guys, we should keep an eye on. I think in this moment, like Washington offensively kind of needs to wake up. It's been a slow start under head coach Jed Fish. Granted, they've won both games and they've won them decently, but it's not that convincing blowout margin. And like we've talked about before, a lot of these Big Ten teams have really struggled out of the gate offensively to kind of assert themselves in these matchups. Despite some special teams blunders and maybe having, too many penalties, though, I think the defense has been solid. But then for Washington State, their offense hasn't faced a defense like this yet either. And I think the Huskies have a pass rush and guys like linebacker Carson Bruner and edge Zach Durfee that should help disrupt John Mateer's rhythm and ability to run that ball with effectiveness like he did the previous week. So is this rivalry as intense as we expected? What do you think about that, Cole? I know me being the Pac-12 guy of the past, I kind of know this head on, but looking at this one, where college football stands today, what do you think about the Apple Cup?
I think it's one of those great rivalry games that we have in college football, right? You and I have talked about it many times over the years of the pageantry that goes into college football. And part of that is the trophies and the rivalry games that come with it. But I think it is kind of taken a little bit away knowing that it's in the 3rd week of the season. I know that we'd much rather have this than losing it altogether. And I know you feel the same way about the Ducks playing the Beavers, this week as well, where, I would be the same way, right? If the Buckeyes were playing Michigan this week, I would feel some type of way about it because it's always that season capper, right? No matter what it is, if you're, trying to get to a bowl game or you're trying to cap off that 12-0 season, you look forward to that as like, that's where all of the emotion, all the intensity, it builds up to that one final crescendo. So it is a bit of a takeaway in my eyes to have it in the 3rd week, but would rather have these rivalries continue rather than get rid of them altogether.
Yeah, and I think even now serving 2 different conferences, I think meeting early in the season, all those intangibles, et cetera, that we just talked about, kind of like you said, I think this rivalry still holds the keys to everything that these teams are hoping to accomplish. It's not just a rivalry trophy. It's a state battle for bragging rights, first of all. And Washington State comes into this being that quote-unquote little brother that just got left behind for the Pac-12 to implode. As you've been seeing in recent news this week, the Pac-2 has now added 4 teams from the Mountain West. So they're going to jump up to Pac-6, still not quite at conference standing, but you don't look at those additions as being that same caliber that the Pac-12 was a year ago. This is truly, I think, Oregon State and Washington State got the short end of the stick on this deal, and rightfully so. They're going to come into this with something to prove. The Huskies come into this, though, with a focus on trying to prove they belong in that discussion with the Big Ten, the teams that are worthy of that playoff aspiration, the Ohio States, the now USCs, the Penn States, the Oregon, the Michigan. Again, even though teams might not have shown pretty great to start the year, Washington's trying to make sure, hey, don't forget, we were just in the college football playoff national championship. You don't just write us off right away. So I think that these rivalries are going to still be just as intense as we expect them to be. The model shifts to showing UW having a 58% chance to win, and that might be as close to a perfect split that we've had from the model so far this year. So this is going to be a really interesting matchup to watch. Overall, bringing up again our big board again, I think Washington State's going to come out firing. I'm really kind of leaning into this underdog, I'm going to show you mentality. I think that it's going to be a very jacked up team. The first quarter is going to be really good. I think the Huskies crowd is going to be a bit uncomfortable with just how much Washington State comes out firing. I really like John Mateen. The UW offense is probably going to slowly work their way back into this game later on, but I think that it's not going to be enough. I mean, Jed Fish, you look at his resume. His Arizona team last year beat Wazoo 44-6. But that was Noah Fafita, Tetaroa McMillan. Okay. Will Rogers is not quite Noah Fafita. And this is also a first-year offense, learning schemes, learning playbook, learning personnel. In week 3, having one of your big rivalry games, I think that I give an edge to Washington State because of the intangibles and also just the familiar. So I guess I can't remember if I made this my upset pick. I'll have to double check it to confirm myself, but I'm taking Washington State here in an upset. Sorry, UW fans, you can hate me for a minute. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. So far, I've been right.
Not even Fusky week, and Big Bear's already getting the Husky fans riled up.
Well, I picked my team to win, and then we end up having an absolute shit show. So I figure if I pick someone else to lose, maybe something will kind of shift around and change. So again, I'm going to take the Cougars here. Who do you take, Cole? You got UW or you taking Wazoo?
I'm going to stick with Washington. I just think I agree with you. I think that Washington State comes out firing. I think they come out intense. This is kind of their chance to show that, no, we belong with everybody else in the country and even the teams that got brought to the Big Ten. But I think overall, Washington just has a better, I'm going to phrase it like this, and it may not make sense, but center of gravity as a team. They're not going to do anything that, blows you away on tape. And they're certainly not the team of last year that played for a national championship, but they're not bad. They're still solidly built. And I think as they settle into the game, they will make that very apparent to the home crowd, who will probably be a little uncomfortable when that game starts. And I don't think anybody should be surprised if Wazoo jumps out to a lead, but I think as they settle in, they'll regain control of that. The crowd will get back into it. And I think they will slowly salt the game away in the second half.
And that might just be the crux of the game right there. How they come back again, like we think it'll happen. Think Wazoo gets up early, think UW has to crawl back. If they can crawl back and then get a lead, that shows something. But I just think that, again, all those things we just talked about, it's really early in the season to have to do all those things in a game like this. The model also agrees with you. They take UW to win here against Wazoo. That starts off this week 3, this weird early season rivalry week. But before we get to the rest of the Big Ten picks, we do have one more marquee matchup we want to talk about. on this episode, and that is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish coming to Purdue. The Irish just coming off of a really, really brutal defeat to a MAC school, Northern Illinois. Purdue coming off a bye week in which they looked really solid in week one. They currently have Notre Dame favored less than 9.5. Looking at this matchup, Cole, like, what are your thoughts on what the Irish bring to the table now, and then this Purdue offense that we've seen so far?
I think I would rather focus on the flip of that, right? Is this Notre Dame offense is clunky. And I thought week one, I was like, Texas A&M, like, not a great team, right? But hostile environment. You know, they've got talent. It's an SEC team, right? So it's going to take a little bit. But I thought for sure that going into week two against a MAC team that they'd get it figured out, you know, they'd kind of get things rolling and we'd get off into the season. And I was so confident in that I picked the over in their game. And clearly you can tell that I didn't win that. And what we got was just this continued inability to really push the ball down the field. And that's on Riley Leonard. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, he still has not thrown a touchdown pass this season, right?
Correct. He has not.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That can't cut it for a dude that is playing for a Notre Dame program that has, I mean, legitimate or not, college football playoff aspirations, right? And they need to be damn near perfect because there is no conference championship to save them. So I think his matchup against this talented and albeit unproven Purdue secondary is really what kind of piques my interest, because Purdue's head coach is a secondary guy, right? Like that's what he did before. That's what he focuses on. And he's brought in a shitload of talent to what was one of the worst passing defenses in the entire country. And if I remember you correctly, was the worst in the Big Ten last year. So he's brought the talent in. He seems to be bringing it along. Now can they do enough to put Purdue and Notre Dame back in that kind of dogfight situation that the Irish found themselves in with NIU last week? And if so, I think Purdue has a pretty good chance to pull off the upset. But before we get to, letting go of my upset pick for everybody to listen about, what are you looking at? Are you looking at Hudson Card against this Notre Dame secondary?
I am. And I guess before I jump to that, Badger wasn't able to join us this week. He did a lot of great research on this matchup. So I'd be remiss if I didn't share some of his knowledge with everybody else. But like, Notre Dame is averaging 18.5 points per game. Their offense has been focusing on that run, averaging 160 rush yards a game. Defense has been solid. They've allowed 14 points a game, struggling against Northern Illinois. Like you mentioned, they have not thrown a touchdown on offense. And so shifting to Purdue in week one dominates 49-0 against Indiana State, kind of what we expected. I mean, they did a similar thing last year, but they were very balanced on offense. They averaged 583 total yards, 335 passing, 248 rushing. Defense was almost perfect. They allowed no points, only gave up 104 rushing yards. You compare that to kind of like the showing that Ohio State did last week against Western Michigan when they won 55-0. I mean, that's how good that Purdue offense looked. But to me, like you just mentioned, I do think that Purdue's explosive offense gives them an edge here, especially with Notre Dame reeling. Hudson Card, as you mentioned, he is 96% passing in week one. He only had one incompletion last week, 275 yards on his own, 4 touchdowns with a long of 43. If you look at his wide receivers, he had at least 3, maybe 4 to 5 passes go for 20 plus yards. So there's explosiveness in that offense. And you look at then the running game, you have Devin Maccabee splitting time a little bit there with Elijah Jackson. So you're not getting those skewed numbers that most of these college football playoff style teams give you, where you have a really dominant running back. I mean, they're splitting carries between 2 guys. Elijah Jackson's averaging 27.7 yards a rush with a long of 69. Devin Mockbee almost just under 10 per rush. So this offense has potential to really light it up. And I think right now where Notre Dame's at, I think that's right where Purdue wants them. They have a home game. I don't believe this is the one, but Purdue is right on the cusp of having 300 total wins in their career history at Ross-Ade Stadium. So that's on the verge of happening as well. They're very motivated right now, and you have to imagine that this is a Boilermaker team similar to ones we've talked about in the past that has a lot to prove. So this is going to be a very interesting game. There's no doubt that you can just write off Purdue from the bat. Shifting back to the big board here, when we make our pick, kind of give us your final answer here of who takes away this matchup in the end.
Yeah, this is as I alluded to earlier. This is my my upset pick. I'm gonna take Purdue to give Notre Dame their not only their second loss of the season and their second loss in a row, but pretty much kick them out of the playoff conversation, which is wild considering it would only be week 3. I just my issue is that I just have not seen enough from Notre Dame's offense that convinces me that they're going to be able to keep up with Purdue. I know they have a talented secondary. I know Purdue is obviously not going against Indiana State. I don't expect Hudson Card to complete 96% of his passes, but they're going to press them because Purdue has nothing to lose here, right? You're talking about a team that has been a bottom dweller for the last couple of years, and now they have an opportunity to go out and shock the entire country. They're going to let it rip. And so if Notre Dame even slips up just a handful of times, they're going to find themselves needing those big explosive plays that they have not found throughout the season so far. And I just don't think that Riley Leonard is going to do it. And especially as you have pointed out to me before the show, that if he's injured, that takes away the only aspect that he's actually been useful in this season, and that's running the ball. So if he's forced to just become a pocket passer, it could be a long day for the Irish. But I think Purdue finds just enough through the air to pull this one out at the end. We'll call it 27-24 Purdue.
This is where it gets tough for me because everything is pointing to Purdue here, especially being that home game. Very, very high chances that they could pull this one away. What I think about with Notre Dame, especially under Marcus Freeman's tenure there, has been they're so hot and cold. There's no consistency. You'll have games like last season where they lose to Ohio State at the final second. The next week they go and they beat Duke in a primetime game. Following week lose to Louisville. And then the following week beat USC by a huge margin. So I think that's where I come at in this one. And this, to me, seems like it's an upset pick, right? Because everything we've just talked about kind of favors Purdue. But I'm sticking with the Irish just for the fact that I know that this team has not been consistent. And I'm leaning into that thought that maybe this is a get back week and maybe there is a piece that we don't know about. Riley Leonard goes down. Notre Dame's got to have the next guy coming, right? I mean, Riley Leonard's not going to be there after this year, just like Sam Hartman wasn't there last year. You're not just going to keep going to the portal. You have to have somebody there that can throw the ball. Maybe this is the guy that's going to step up and be the next Notre Dame quarterback. I don't know. I'm shooting wood at the fire and hope it sparks, but I think I'm going to stick with Notre Dame. I'm probably wrong. Hope I'm not, but the model kind of does that too. Granted, the model, I think, stuck with this one, not knowing Riley Leonard's injured. If the model truly had an AI type brain, maybe it shifts it to favor, like you said, with Purdue. And before we jump into our other picks, Badger also takes Purdue in this matchup by a pretty big margin. He has them 31-17 over Notre Dame. So Purdue, fill Ross-Ade Stadium and show out this weekend because it could be a really great one for that hometown faithful. Moving to the remaining picks of week 3 We have the list here. We are starting with Oregon and Oregon State, the Civil War, the battle for the Platypus Trophy, whatever we want to call it. If we want to, keep it PG, keep it modern, whatever. It's the Civil War. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it there. Cole, I'll pass to you first. Who wins this game and why?
First off, Big Bear, I am just disappointed in you that you still don't have a replica of that trophy. I mean, come on.
Man. I can't find it. I've tried. I try to pay people with 3D printers to do it everywhere. If you're at home watching and you have a 3D printer and want to print me the Platypus Trophy, hit me up in the DMs because I will pay mucho dinero for that. Just saying.
You're either going to get exactly what you wanted or something very disturbing and sexual. And that's what I love about the internet. No, it's an awesome trophy, and I'm going to make this sweet. I think the Ducks raise it again. I just don't see, even though they've struggled, I think Oregon is still a very good team, and I think they find themselves and they kind of get things going in the right direction for the season.
Yeah, if you were to ask me to do this math style, Oregon was favored by 35 week 1. They won by 14 10. They were favored by 19.5 last week. They won by 3. So if they're favored this week by 16, 17, I mean, they're bound to tie, right? I mean, that's, if we're looking at, power deduction with ultimate letdown disappointments. All right. All that being said, I have Oregon winning. I'm keeping expectations incredibly low until they show me otherwise. Offensive line's been absolutely awful. Cole, you've gotten my text for 2 weeks straight until 2 a.m. because Big Ten After Dark is almost more brutal to me than Pac-12 After Dark ever was. So I'm taking the Ducks. Hopefully they're 3-0. Hopefully there's no tears shed here in the Urbanski household this weekend. I will be alone. So the model takes the Ducks. That took a really, really dark undertone.
Super dark. I thought you were just going to referring to having to replace your carpet again because you wore a hole in it pacing.
Yeah. That I've been staying on the hardwood, but we almost sparked some flames last week. So, all right, we digress. We move on. Game number 2, Arkansas State against Michigan. I know that Michigan didn't show great last week. I know that the offense is trying to figure it out. I'm not expecting huge numbers. I'm not expecting some giant turnaround where they put up 48 plus points here. I think they score enough to win. I honestly think that Arkansas State probably covers this margin. If I'm not mistaken, it's Michigan by less than 23. I feel like Arkansas State can probably stay within that at least within 3 touchdowns, probably, especially with how their season has started. I'm taking Michigan. What about you?
Yeah, I'm still taking Michigan. I played up that line a little bit, I believe, to plus 30.5 for Arkansas State. Michigan's got to find something back, either getting back to their identity or leaning into this passing game and get a little more creative with it because, like I said, this is more or less a tune-up game, and then you got another top 15, probably top 10 showdown next week with USC, so they got to get ready, and they got to get ready fast.
The model sticks with us with Michigan. We move to Central Michigan against Illinois, another MAC school, granted, coming to play. An Illinois team that upset the Kansas Jayhawks. And shout out to our good old buddy on TikTok that said that no wonder we have 200 followers because we picked Illinois to beat Kansas. And then that comment very quickly disappeared. So hopefully we got a new fan of the show. Welcome. Glad you joined us this week. Hope you enjoy. Cole, what do you think here? Does Central Michigan channel that Northern Illinois magic, or is Illinois taking this home?
I absolutely love how you just create internet feuds and just smoke people into the ground with them. It's my favorite part of starting this whole podcast. No, I think Illinois has a really good defense, and I think they're going to keep this thing cooking. And they'll be challenged down the line. We mentioned a couple of their matchups, but for right now, yeah, they keep the undefeated streak going.
And to keep the undefeated streak of our picks going, the model and I both stick with you and Illinois. Let's change it up a little bit now. We have Indiana at UCLA. I'll shoot it right back to you. Are the Hoosiers staying hot?
I think so. This is, we talked about Notre Dame and Michigan kind of struggling on offense. The Hoosiers are not struggling at all. They dropped 77 last week, and obviously a huge upgrade in competition. But I like where the Hoosiers are headed right now, and I just have a lot of questions about UCLA, they've won, but it hasn't really been as impressive as I think we had thought it might be. So yeah, give me the Hoosiers to keep it going.
I'm sticking with the Hoosiers too. I think, like you said, they're clicking on all cylinders. Solid passing game, a potent rushing attack. They have no significant mistakes so far. They're executing well on third downs. They're 11-19. They're playing disciplined football. 6.4 yards per rush, 12 yards per catch, no interceptions so far. They haven't faced top tier competition, but like those early games are building confidence now under Coach Kurt Cignetti. And we mentioned in earlier weeks that, if he's able to provide that same James Madison-esque offense to the Hoosiers, like they're going to be able to show people up. And I think that's where they're at. So I'm sticking with the Hoosiers too, but here's where it gets a little dicey. The model's throwing an upset pick and they're picking UCLA in that home game. I wish the model could give us their thoughts as to why they're doing it, but UCLA, I believe, am I correct here? UCLA is 2-0 also, right? That's a good start for the year for them under Deshaun Foster. So I think that, it's a good showing for both teams being where they're at, being able to set themselves up to go 3 weeks, 3 wins. But we're torn here. So I guess this might be a must watch for the weekend. Next matchup, Prairie View A&M University, one of Badger's favorite universities, and unfortunately he is not with us to preview them. I'll look through his notes and see what he says, but they play the Michigan State Spartans. Cole, who do you take here?
Yeah, the Spartans surprised us last week, kind of derailed our Maryland hype for the year very early on, and that was a bit disappointing, but Aiden Childs is, you kind of take the good and the bad, makes a lot of good throws, makes some very questionable ones as we saw last week, but he should get a lot of opportunities to air it out this week and continue to kind of fine tune himself before he gets back into Big Ten play. But yeah, give me the Spartans.
I'm right there with you. I'm taking the Spartans. I wouldn't count out our Maryland pick yet. It's very disappointing that happened, especially how inconsistent Michigan State looked at first to start, but we'll see. Maybe Mike Loxley can get those guys right there. But this matchup in FCS, like I don't think that again, Florida Atlantic couldn't do it. I don't think Prairie View is going to do it. I think that it's a building block for Jonathan Smith in that program. I think the Spartans take this one, and the model agrees with us as well. Our last slate of games, we have Nevada against Minnesota. Who do you got here?
It was an ugly and frustrating start to the season for Minnesota. Got back on track last week, and I think they continue that this week against a Nevada team. Probably will be a little closer than last week, but I think Minnesota is kind of starting to find themselves, and more importantly, Max Brosmer is starting to really see how he fits into this system for the Gophers.
Yeah, Nevada's 1-2. They're coming off of a 20-17 loss, and they've averaged 23 points per game, struggling defensively, allowing 25 points per game, and they rank 133rd in passing yards allowed. So Max Brosmer might have a day against Nevada on Saturday. Give me and the model both the Gophers here. Troy against Iowa. Iowa losing a very, very dramatic upset fashion game against the Cyclones last weekend. Killed my parlay. Thank you very much, Iowa, for screwing that into the ground. Maybe you score more points this week. I mean, I'm not just going to sit here and say that you are showing us signs of offense, because you're not. And it's Troy. But I think your defense is good enough to win. So I'm going to stick with Iowa again this week. They get another win in non-conference play. What about you?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to have to worry about, scoring too much. Troy has the 104th ranked total offense in the country. So going against that Hawkeye defense, their score should be relatively close to 0. So as long as the Hawkeyes can get at least 6 on the board, I think they'll be in good shape to get their second win of the season.
Yeah. So we're going to shift to Nebraska, a bright shining star from week 2 in that win against Colorado. They're playing Northern Iowa, the Iowa team that didn't screw my parlay last weekend and blow up my entire Saturday. I'm going to pick them for this weekend's parlay because I don't think they'll disappoint me. I'm taking Nebraska against them. I think Nebraska's offense is awesome right now. I like the running game. I miss Dante Dowdell as a Duck. Really a shame that guy got away. But Dylan Raiola, the Patrick Mahomes impressions are getting just so much closer and so much creepier. But it works out for them, and they're playing good football. Are you also along that line with Nebraska?
Yeah, it's super cringy what he's doing. But yeah, they shouldn't have any issues this weekend. Next Friday, though, we get to see him against a very stout Illinois defense. So that'll be some fun Big Ten Friday night football for everybody.
Eastern Illinois against Northwestern. Cole, I'll turn to you here first. We know Northwestern's offense continues to be a struggle bus, but what are they able to get enough points here to pull out a win against Eastern Illinois? Yeah,
I think this will be a pseudo comfortable win. Again, I'm not anticipating any type of major blowout here, but for a Northwestern offense that's currently ranked 110th in the country in total offense, I think they will find enough points to beat Eastern Illinois. And if not, then we might have already witnessed the wheels fall off this Northwestern program.
Yeah, I did not pick Northwestern last week against Duke. It came true. I'm going to go with Northwestern this week. I think they have enough to win this one. The model sticks with us. Our last one on week 3 previews. I just noticed it said week 2 at the bottom of the graphic. I try so hard to get things perfect, people, I swear, but it's like one little thing just derails. So you probably didn't notice it till I just said it. I'm sorry, but we point out our own flaws here at First and Goal because we seek perfection. Maryland versus Virginia, our final pick of the games we have here. I think that Maryland's offense, especially in the air, should have an edge here. They lost that really, really disappointing game last week, 27-24 to Michigan State. The defense has been inconsistent. They gave up 292 pass yards per game, but they've only allowed 109 rush yards per game. And their offense has already put up almost near 1,000 yards of total offense this year, kind of similar to what we talked about with Alabama. I think that Virginia's got a shaky pass defense, and that will play to Maryland's favor. I take the Terps here. Do you go with Maryland as well?
Yeah, you talked about it earlier that it's not, all for naught. I think the Terrapins can get back on track against a Virginia team who I do not think is very impressive, despite what their record shows. So, yeah, I think Maryland gets it back on track and hopefully can build a little momentum headed back into Big Ten play.
We're going to cap off the week 3 picks with the model also taking Maryland, which scores us a perfect page of the exact same picks. Hopefully this is the last week we all pick the exact same teams. Non-conference, while beautiful with upsets, can also be a bit boring with similar thoughts on victors. Let's go to the prop bets. Okay, these are our 3-point bets. Cole, you talked about your upset pick with Purdue. Again, I need to look through mine to confirm it. I will confirm it for the end of this episode. But the prop bet, the 3-point pick, who are you taking in this week's picks?
I alluded it to, when we were going through our breakdowns of these Big Ten games, but it's Aiden Childs, right? Really got to let it rip against Maryland. 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Like I said, a lot of good with a lot of bad. A humongous step backwards in terms of defensive talent. And so I think he's going to be allowed to kind of air it out again. And so I anticipate him going over 250 yards passing for the second time this season.
My upset pick for the record was Washington State. I don't know how I couldn't remember that. We talked about it for like 5 minutes. My prop bet, 3-point bet, I'm sticking with, as I just mentioned, the Washington State quarterback, John Mateer. He can do it with his feet. He can do it with his arm. I think he gets 3+ total touchdowns in this game against Washington. I think he can do it all, and I think he'll put them up. The model and their prop bet going with Oregon and taking wide receiver Evan Stewart with more than 100 yards receiving against Oregon State. We did see last week that Dylan Gabriel did hit Evan Stewart with a deep 69-yard touchdown. Or sorry, maybe that wasn't a touchdown, deep pass for 69 yards. So it got him up near that 100-yard mark, thinking that he'll probably be able to do it again here against the Beavers in week 3. So before we finish out the episode, we're going to go to Badgers picks. Even though he's not with us, we do want to make note that if you're using Underdog Fantasy, you can do these college football drafts as well. Or if you are new to Underdog Fantasy, you can join using the Walk-On Red Shirts code WALKON. It's WALKON. You'll be able to score a special pick as well as get up to $1,000 of a bonus deposit for your initial deposit. Badger chooses 4 players. He picks a quarterback, a running back, a wide receiver, and then a flex position, sometimes a tight end. We have Aiden Childs. Cole, you mentioned you think he's going to get over 250 yards passing for Michigan State against Prairie View A&M. That's who Jeff takes as the quarterback spot. At the running back spot, he's got Purdue running back Devin Mockabee in that game against Notre Dame, thinking that between him and Elijah Jackson, that Devin Mockabee is going to be able to get his yardage and maybe even in the end zone against the Irish. At wide receiver, he has Tez Johnson in their game against Oregon State. Again, we talked about how there's been some explosive plays last week from Dylan Gabriel, but he does like to lean towards Tez Johnson in the passing game. I think he will get his own. Should be a safe pick for you at home for this week's draft. And then lastly, Giles Jackson, Washington wide receiver, hoping to link up with Will Rogers in that game against the Cougars as they look to expose that passing defense. Whew, that's a mouthful. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our week 3 previews of First and Goal. Remember to connect with us on social media. We're always throwing out crazy fun stuff for you guys to look at. Interact with us. Shoot us DMs if you have questions. We love reading them on the show. Big things for this weekend. You'll probably find me in front of a TV set. Might even have to pull the projector out and watch at a bonfire outside. So, Kurt and I, if you're available, feel free to swing over and we can do that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us this week. Happy to have you. Just remember, this has been First and Goal.